Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man! Order. Presentation of Bill, Geraint Davis.
Well, that was Prime Minister's questions. We're now going to get some technical business before the start of the budget. With me is our political editor, Faisal Islam. And Faisal, what's really amazing about that Prime Minister's questions is MPs largely ignored the fact that the budget's about to take place.
Yes, but you could argue we're going to have plenty of time to discuss that over the next few days. I thought the most telling thing was that was the first time, really, we've seen a full throttle exchange between Jeremy Corbyn and the Prime Minister on the issue of the Brexit negotiations. There's plenty of material for any opposition politician to pick up on, leaked memos, articles from different cabinet ministers, the state of play as regards messaging from our European partners too, which hasn't been great, shall we say, over the past few weeks. And Jeremy Corbyn went for it. It will almost certainly get lost in the budget news that we get today, but he was quoting from the alleged leaked memo from the Foreign Secretary and the Environment Secretary, saying that there needs to be an infusion of energy and passion.
Right, we can go now to Philip Hammond delivering his budget.
Continues to create more jobs than ever before and continues to confound those who seek to talk it down. An economy set on a path to a new relationship with our European neighbours and a new future outside the European Union. A future that will be full of change, full of new challenges, and above all, full of new opportunities. And in this budget, we express our resolve to look forwards, not backwards, to embrace that change, to meet those challenges head-on, and to seize those opportunities for Britain. The negotiations on our future relationship with the EU are in a critical phase. My right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, has been clear that we seek a deep and special partnership based on free and frictionless trade in goods and services, close collaboration on security, and strong mutual respect and friendship. And as Chancellor, Mr Deputy Speaker, I am clear that one of the biggest boosts we can provide to businesses and families, one of the best ways to protect British jobs and prosperities as we build that new future, is to make early progress in delivering my right honourable friend's vision, with an implementation agreement that allows businesses to plan and invest with confidence. And this government will make the pursuit of that progress a top priority in the weeks ahead. But, Mr Deputy Speaker, while we work to achieve this deep and special partnership, we are determined to ensure that the country is prepared for every possible outcome. We have already invested almost £700 million in Brexit preparations, and today I am setting aside over the next 2 years another £3 billion, and I stand ready to allocate further sums if and when needed. Mr Deputy Speaker, no one should doubt our resolve. But this budget is about much more than Brexit. The world is on the brink of a technological revolution, one that will change the way we work and live and transform our living standards for generations to come. And we face a choice. Either we embrace the future, seize the opportunities which lie within our grasp, and build on Britain's great global success story, or, as the party opposite advocates, reject change and turn inwards to the failed and irrelevant dogmas of the past. Mr Deputy Speaker, we have no doubts. We choose the future. We choose to run towards change, not away from it, to prepare our people to meet the challenges ahead, not to hide from them. And the prize will be enormous, because for the first time in decades, Britain is genuinely at the forefront of this technological revolution, not just in our universities and research institutes, but this time in the commercial development labs of our great companies and on factory floors and business parks across this land. But we must invest to secure that bright future for Britain. And at this budget, that is what we choose to do. But, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we are listening and we understand the frustration of families where real incomes are under pressure. So at this budget, we choose a balanced approach. Yes, maintaining fiscal responsibility as we at last see our debt peaking. Continuing to invest in the skills and infrastructure that will support the jobs of the future. Building the homes that will make good on our promise to the next generation. But crucially, also helping families to cope with the cost of living. Mr. Deputy Speaker, as we invest in our country's future, I have a clear vision of what that global Britain looks like. A prosperous and inclusive economy, where everybody has the opportunity to shine, wherever in these islands they live and whatever their background, where talent and hard work are rewarded, where the dream of home ownership is a reality for all generations, a hub of enterprise and innovation, a beacon of creativity, a civilised and tolerant place that cares for the vulnerable and nurtures the talented, an outward-looking, free-trading nation, a force for good in the world. That is the Britain that I want to leave to my children, Mr. Deputy Speaker, a Britain we can be proud of, a country fit for the future. I know we will not build it overnight, but in this budget today, we will lay the foundations. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'm being tempted with something a little more exotic here, but I'm going to stick to plain water. But I did take the precaution. I did take the precaution of asking my right honourable friend to bring a packet of cough sweets, just in case. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I shall...
Order. I think it might be a hearing aid we all need if this continues. Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I shall first report to the House on the economic forecasts of the independent OBR. This is the bit with the long economic-y words in it. Once again, I thank Robert Choate and his team for their hard work over the last few weeks. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I believe passionately that the best way to improve the lives of people across the length and breadth of this country is to help them get into work. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, I am acutely aware that 1.4 million people out of work is 1.4 million too many. So today, I welcome the OBR forecast that there will be another 600,000 people in work by 2022. And I am immensely proud of this government's record in having created over 3 million new jobs since 2010. Incidentally, a rather far cry from the 1.2 million job losses that the Right Honourable Member for Hayes and Harlington predicted in 2011. But let nobody be in any doubt that this government will continue its relentless focus on getting more people into work, giving them the security and peace of mind of a regular wage. But I also want work to be a good quality, well paid, and regrettably, our productivity performance continues to disappoint. The OBR has assumed at each of the last 16 fiscal events that productivity growth would return to its pre-crisis trend of about 2% a year, but it has remained stubbornly flat. So today, they revised down the outlook for productivity growth, business investment and GDP growth across the forecast period. The OBR now expects to see GDP grow 1.5% in 2017, 1.4% in 2018, 1.3% in 2019 and 2020, before picking back up to 1.5% and finally 1.6% in 2022, with inflation peaking at 3% in this quarter before falling back towards target over the next year. And today I reaffirm the remit for the Independent Monetary Policy Committee and its 2% CPI inflation target. Mr. Deputy Speaker, we took over an economy with the highest budget deficit in our peacetime history. Since then, thanks to the hard work of the British people, that deficit has been shrinking, and next year will be below 2%. But our debt is still too high, and we need to get it down, not for some ideological reason, but because excessive debt undermines our economic security, leaving us vulnerable to shocks, because it passes the burden unfairly to the next generation, and because it simply cannot be right to spend more on our debt interest than we do on our police and our armed forces combined. So I'm pleased to be able to tell the House that OBR expects debt to peak this year and then gradually fall as a share of GDP, a turning point in our recovery from Labour's crisis.
Fixing Labour's mess.
But, Mr. Deputy Speaker, apparently not everyone shares the view that falling debt is good news. I've heard representations from the party opposite suggesting increasing the debt by £500 billion, taking us back to square one, wasting an extra £7 billion a year on debt interest. Mr. Speaker, if they carry on like that, there'll be plenty of others joining Keisha Dugdale in saying, "I'm Labour, get me out of here." Mr. Deputy Speaker, it must be. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I have rejected these representations, and instead I reaffirm our pledge of fiscal responsibility and our commitment to the fiscal rules I set out last autumn. But now I choose to use some of the headroom I established then, so that as well as reducing debt, we can also invest in Britain's future, support our key public services, keep taxes low, and provide a little help to families and businesses under pressure. A balanced approach that will prepare Britain for the future, not seek to hide from it. Today, the OBR confirm that we are on track to meet our fiscal rules. Borrowing is forecast to be £49.9 billion this year. That's £8.4 billion lower than forecast at the spring budget. And after taking account of all decisions since the spring budget, the OPR's GDP revision and the measures I will announce today, borrowing will fall in every year of the forecast, from £39.5 billion next year to £25.6 billion in 22-23, to reach its lowest level in 20 years. As a percentage of our GDP, it falls from 2.4% this year to 1.9% next year, then 1.6%, 1.5%, 1.3%, and finally 1.1% in 22-23. The OBR forecasts the structural deficit to be 1.3% of GDP in 2021, giving £14.8 billion of headroom against our 2% target. Debt will peak at 86.5% of GDP this year. It will then fall to 86.4% next year, then 86.1%, 83.1%, 79.3%, and finally 79.1% in 22-23. The first sustained decline in debt in 17 years. Mr. Deputy Speaker, under Conservative-led governments, the hard work of the British people is steadily clearing up the mess left behind by Labour. Mr. Deputy Speaker, at the heart of global Britain must be a dynamic and innovative economy. On Monday, the Prime Minister set out the key elements of our modern industrial strategy, a strategy to raise productivity and wages in all parts of our country and to guarantee the brighter future we have promised to the next generation. My right honourable friend, the Business Secretary, will present a white paper to the House in the next few days. But this is not just an economic plan. It is a key part of our vision for a fairer Britain. A Britain where every one of our citizens can contribute to and share in the benefits of prosperity. And the key to raising the wages of British workers is raising investment, public and private. And Mr Deputy Speaker, we are investing in Britain's future. £500 billion since 2010. The biggest rail programme since Victorian times, the largest road building programme since the 1970s, the biggest increase in science and innovation funding in 4 decades, and the 2 largest infrastructure projects in Europe, Crossrail and HS2. When I took this job, I committed to make the battle to raise Britain's productivity, and thus the nation's pay, the central mission of the Treasury. Last autumn, I launched the National Productivity Investment Fund to provide an additional £23 billion of investment over 5 years to upgrade Britain's economic infrastructure for the 21st century. Today, I can announce that I will extend this fund for a further year and expand it to over £31 billion. Meaning, Mr Deputy Speaker, that public investment under this government will, on average, be £25 billion per year higher in real terms than under the last Labour government. We are allocating a further £2.3 billion for investment in R&D, and we'll increase the main R&D tax credit to 12%, taking the first strides towards the ambition of the industrial strategy to drive up R&D investment across the economy to 2.4% of GDP. Mr Deputy Speaker, Britain is the world's 6th largest economy. London is the #1 international financial services centre. We have some of the world's best companies and a commanding position in a raft of tech and digital industries that will form the backbone of the global economy of the future. Those who underestimate Britain do so at their peril. Because we will harness this potential and turn it into the high-paid, high-productivity jobs of tomorrow. Others may choose to reject the future. We choose to embrace it. A new tech business is founded in Britain every hour, and I want that to be every half hour. So today, we invest over £500 million in a range of initiatives, from artificial intelligence to 5G and full-fibre broadband. We support regulatory innovation with a new Regulators Pioneer Fund and a new Geospatial Data Commission to develop a strategy for using the government's location data to support economic growth. And to help our tech startups reach scale, we asked Sir Damon Buffini to review the availability of patient capital, and I'm very grateful to him. Today, we're publishing an action plan to unlock over £20 billion of new investment in UK knowledge-intensive scale-up businesses, including through a new fund in the British Business Bank, seeded with £2.5 billion of public money, by facilitating pension fund access to long-term investments, and by doubling EIS investment limits for knowledge-intensive companies, while ensuring that EIS is not used as a shelter for low-risk capital preservation schemes. And we stand ready to step in to replace European Investment Fund lending if necessary. Mr Deputy Speaker, there is perhaps no technology as symbolic of the revolution gathering pace around us as driverless vehicles. Now, they surely don't want me to make that joke about the Labour Party again, Mr Deputy Speaker. Mr Deputy Speaker, I know that Jeremy Clarkson doesn't like them, but there are many other good reasons to pursue this technology. So today, we step up our support for it. Sorry, Jeremy, but definitely not the first time you've been snubbed by Hammond and May. Our future vehicles will be driverless. Our future vehicles will be driverless, but they'll be electric first. And that's a change that needs to come as soon as possible for our planet. So we'll establish a new £400 million charging infrastructure fund, invest an extra £100 million in plug-in car grant and £40 million in charging R&D. And I can confirm today that we will clarify the law so that people who charge their electric vehicles at work will not face a benefit-in-kind charge from next year. The tax system can play an important role in protecting our environment. We owe it to our children that the air they breathe is clean. We published our air quality plan earlier this year, and we said then that we would fund it through taxes on new diesel cars. From April 2018, the first-year VED rate for diesel cars that don't meet the latest standards will go up by £1, and the existing diesel supplement in company car tax will increase by 1 percentage point. Drivers buying a new car will be able to avoid this charge as soon as manufacturers bring forward the next generation cleaner diesels that we all want to see. And we only apply this measure to cars. So before the headline writers start limbering up, let me be quite clear. No white van man, no white van woman will be hit by these measures. This levy will fund a new £220 million Clean Air Fund to provide support for the implementation of local air quality plans, improving of the quality of the air in cities and towns up and down the UK. But our air quality is sadly not our only environmental challenge. Audiences across the country, glued to Blue Planet 2, have been starkly reminded of the problems of plastics pollution. The UK led the world on climate change agreements and is a pioneer in protecting marine environments. And I want us now to become a world leader in tackling the scourge of plastic littering our planet and our oceans. So with my right honourable friend, the Environment Secretary, I will investigate how the tax system and charges on single-use plastic items can reduce waste. Because, Mr Deputy Speaker, we cannot keep our promise to the next generation to build an economy fit for the future unless we ensure our planet has a future. Mr Deputy Speaker, meeting the challenge of change head-on means giving our people the confidence to embrace it and the skills to reap the rewards from it, and we have a plan to do so. We're delivering 3 million apprenticeship starts by 2020 thanks to our apprenticeship levy, and I'll keep under review the flexibility that levy payers have to spend this money. We're introducing T-levels, and today I provide a further £20 million to support FE colleges to prepare for them. Mr Deputy Speaker, knowledge of maths is key to the high-tech, cutting-edge jobs in our digital economy. It's also useful, by the way, in less glamorous roles like frontline politics. So we will expand the Teaching for Mastery of Maths programme to a further 3,000 schools. We'll provide £40 million to train maths teachers across the country. We'll introduce a £600 maths premium for schools for every additional pupil who takes A-level core and A-level or for new maths schools across England, so highly talented young mathematicians can release their potential wherever they live and whatever their background. More maths for everyone. Mr Speaker, don't let anyone say I don't know how to show the nation a good time. Computer science is also at the heart of this revolution. So we'll ensure that every secondary school pupil can study computing by tripling the number of trained computer science teachers to 12,000. And we'll work with industry to create a new national centre for computing. But, Mr Deputy Speaker, rapid technological change means we also need to help people to retrain during their working lives, ensuring that our workforce is equipped with the skills they need for the workplace of the future. So today, my right honourable friend, the Education Secretary, and I are launching an historic partnership between government, the CBI and the TUC to set the strategic direction for a national retraining scheme. Its first priority will be to boost digital skills and to support expansion of the construction sector. And to make a start immediately, We will invest £30 million in the development of digital skills distance learning courses so people can learn wherever they are and whenever they want. And I'm pleased to be able to accept the representation that I've received from the TUC to continue to fund Union Learn, which I recognise as a valuable part of our support to workplace learning. Mr. Deputy Speaker. Apparently they don't, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, backing skills. I got an email from Len asking me specially, so I couldn't say no, could I? Backing skills is key to unlocking growth nationally, but far too much of our economic strength is concentrated in our capital city. If we are truly to build an economy that's fit for the future, then we have to get all parts of the UK firing on all cylinders. And that is what our modern industrial strategy is all about. Today, we back the Northern Powerhouse, the Midlands Engine, and elected mayors across the UK. We back them with a new £1.7 billion Transforming Cities Fund, half of it to be shared by the 6 areas with elected metro mayors to give them the firepower to deliver on local transport priorities, and the remainder will be open to competition by other cities in England. We're investing £300 million to ensure that HS2 infrastructure will accommodate future Northern Powerhouse and Midland Engine rail improvements. I'm also providing £30 million today to trial new solutions to improve mobile and digital connectivity on trains on the Trans-Pennine route. We're developing a local industrial strategy with Manchester, and I'm pleased to announce a second devolution deal with Andy Street in the West Midlands. We've agreed a new devolution deal with North of the Tyne, and we will fund the replacement of the 40-year-old rolling stock on the Tyne and Wear Metro at a total investment of £337 million. We'll invest £123 million in the Redcar Steelworks site to support the ambitious plans of our new Tees Valley Mayor, Ben Houchen, and my honourable friend from Middlesbrough South and East Cleveland, who are leading the fight for prosperity in their area. And, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we're piloting 100% business rates retention in London next year and continuing to work with TfL on the funding and financing of Crossrail 2. We will also make over £1 billion of discounted lending available to local authorities across the country to support high-value infrastructure projects. A Conservative government giving power back to the people of Britain and driving prosperity and greater fairness across our United Kingdom. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the decisions taken in this budget also mean £2 billion more for the Scottish Government, £1.2 billion more for the Welsh Government, and over £650 million more for a Northern Ireland executive. I can confirm today that progress is being made on city deals for Tay Cities and Stirling and on a growth deal for Borderlands. I'm getting used, Mr. Deputy Speaker, to the experience of having my ear bent by 13 Scottish Conservative colleagues. Most recently on the issue of Scottish Police and Fire VAT. The SNP knew the rules, they knew the consequences of introducing these bodies, and they ploughed ahead anyway. But, Mr. Deputy Speaker, my Scottish Conservative colleagues have persuaded me that the Scottish people should not lose out just because of the obstinacy of the SNP government. So we will legislate to allow VAT refunds from April 2018. And in response to yet more representations from my honourable Scottish friends, aided and abetted by my honourable friend for Waveney, from November 2018, we will introduce transferable tax history for transfers of oil and gas fields in the North Sea, an innovative tax policy that will encourage new entrants to bring fresh investment to a basin that still holds up to 20 billion barrels of oil. We will begin negotiations towards growth deals for North Wales and Mid Wales, and we'll abolish tolls on the Severn Bridge as promised by the end of next year. We'll deliver on our commitment to review the effect of VAT and APD on tourism in Northern Ireland, reporting at next year's budget, and we will open negotiations for a Belfast City deal as part of our commitment to a comprehensive and ambitious set of city deals across Northern Ireland. A Conservative government delivering for all parts of our United Kingdom. Mr. Deputy Speaker, it is only by supporting our regions and nations, dealing with our debts and investing in skills and infrastructure for the long term that we can build an economy fit for the future. But I recognise that many people are feeling pressure on their budgets now. And because we are all in politics to make people's lives better, in the short term as well as the long term, we will take further measures in this budget to help families and businesses where we can. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the switch to universal credit is a long overdue and necessary reform. Replacing Labour's broken system that discouraged people from working more than 16 hours a week and trapped 1.4 million on out-of-work benefits for nearly a decade, universal credit delivers a modern welfare system where work always pays and people are supported to earn. But I recognise, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the genuine concerns on both sides of the House about the operational delivery of this benefit, and today we will act on those concerns. First, we will remove the 7-day waiting period applied at the beginning of a benefit claim so that entitlement to universal credit will start on the day of the claim. To provide greater support during the waiting period, we will change the advances system to ensure that any household that needs it can access a full month's payment within 5 days of applying. We will make it possible to apply for an advance online. We will extend the repayment period for advances from 6 months to 12 months. And any new universal credit claimant in receipt of housing benefit at the time of the claim will continue to receive that housing benefit for a further 2 weeks, making it easier for them to pay their rent. This, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is a £1.5 billion package to address concerns about the delivery of the benefit. My right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, will give further details in a statement to the House tomorrow. Mr. Deputy Speaker, we also want to help low-income households in areas where rents have been rising fastest. In the long run, of course, the answer lies in increasing the amount of housing available, a theme I shall return to. But in the meantime, the best way to help them is by increasing the rate of support in those areas where rents are least affordable. So we will increase targeted affordability funding by £125 million over the next 2 years, benefiting 140,000 people. We will always listen to genuine concerns and act where we can to help. Mr. Deputy Speaker, making work pay is core to the philosophy of this government. That is why we introduced the national living wage in 2016. From April, it will rise by 4.4%, from £7.50 an hour to £7.83, handing full-time workers a further £600 pay increase, taking their total pay rise since its introduction to over £2,000 a year. We also accept the Low Pay Commission's recommendations on national minimum wage rates, supporting our young people with the largest increase in youth rates in 10 years, delivering a pay rise for over 2 million minimum wage workers of all ages across the country. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the facts are these. Income inequality today is at its lowest level in 30 years. The top 1% are paying a larger share of income tax than at any time under the last Labour government. The poorest 10% in Britain have seen their real incomes grow faster since 2010 than the richest 10%, and the proportion of full-time jobs that are low-paid is at its lowest level for 20 years. A Conservative government delivering a fairer Britain. But as well as making work pay, we want families to keep more of the money they earn. When we came into office, the personal allowance stood at £6,475 a year. From April, I will increase the personal allowance to £11,850 and the higher rate threshold to £46,350, making progress towards our manifesto commitments, which I reiterate today. The typical basic rate taxpayer will be £1,075 a year better off compared to 2010, and a full-time worker on the national living wage will take home more than £3,800 extra. This Conservative government delivering for Britain's workers. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I turn now to duties. The tobacco duty escalator will continue at inflation plus 2%, with an additional 1% duty on hand-rolling tobacco this year, and minimum excise duty on cigarettes will also rise. Excessive alcohol consumption by the most vulnerable people is all too often through cheap, high-strength, low-quality products, especially so-called white ciders. I want to pay tribute to the campaign led by my honourable friend for Congleton on this issue, and so following our recent consultation, we will legislate to increase duty on these products from 2019. But recognising the pressure on household budgets and backing our great British pubs, duties on other ciders, wines, spirits and on beer will be frozen. This will mean a bottle of whisky will be £1.15 less in 2018 than if we had continued with Labour's plans, and a pint of beer 12p less. So Merry Christmas, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The cost of travel is also an important factor for families and businesses. From April 2019, I will again freeze short-haul air passenger duty rates, and I will also freeze long-haul economy rates, paid for by an increase on premium class tickets and on private jets. Sorry, Lewis. For those who don't stretch to a private jet, I can announce a new rail card for those aged 26 to 30, giving 4.5 million more young people a third off their rail fares. And I will, Mr. Deputy Speaker, once again cancel the fuel duty rise for both petrol and diesel that is scheduled for April. Since 2010, we will have saved the average car driver £850 and the average van driver over £2,100 compared to Labour's escalator plans. Fuel duty has now been frozen for the longest period in 40 years at a total cost to the Exchequer of £46 billion since 2010. Mr. Deputy Speaker, our NHS is one of our great institutions, an essential part of what we are as a nation, and a source of pride, the length and breadth of the country. Its values are the values of the British people, and we will always back it. Dedicated NHS staff are handling the challenges of an ageing population and a rapidly advancing technology with skill and commitment, and we salute them. Mr. Deputy Speaker, although you wouldn't think so to listen to the Leader of the Opposition, as he regularly talks down the achievements of the NHS, although you wouldn't think so, the number of patients being treated is at record levels, cancer survival rates are at their highest ever level, 17 million people are now able to access GP appointments in the evenings and at weekends, and public satisfaction amongst hospital inpatients is at its highest level in more than 20 years. It is central to this government's vision that everyone has access to the NHS free at the point of need. That is why we endorsed and funded the NHS's 5-year forward view in 2014. But even with this additional funding, we acknowledge that the service remains under pressure, and today we respond. First, we will deliver an additional £10 billion package of capital investment in frontline services over the course of this Parliament to support the sustainability and transformation plans which will make our NHS more resilient, investing for an NHS fit for the future. But we also recognise that the NHS is under pressure right now. I am therefore exceptionally and outside the spending review process making an additional commitment of resource funding of £2.8 billion to the NHS in England. £350 million immediately to allow trusts to plan for this winter, £1.6 billion in 2018-19, with the balance in 19-20, taking the extra resource into the NHS next year to £3.75 billion in total. Meaning, Mr. Deputy Speaker, meaning that our NHS will receive a £7.5 billion increase to its resource budget over this year and next. Mr. Deputy Speaker, our nation's nurses provide invaluable support to us all in our time of greatest need and deserve our deepest gratitude for their tireless efforts. My right honourable friend, the Health Secretary, has already begun discussions with health unions on pay structure modernisation for Agenda for Change staff to improve recruitment and retention. He will submit evidence to the independent pay review body in due course. But I want to assure NHS staff and patients and members of this House that if the Health Secretary's talks bear fruit, I will protect patient services by providing additional funding for such a settlement. Mr. Deputy Speaker, just as our public services must be fit for the future, so too must our tax system. It must remain competitive to attract the brightest and the best to establish and grow the businesses of the future. It must raise the revenue we need to fund our public services, and it must be robust against abuse so that it is fair to all. Now, we've heard a lot of talk recently from the party opposite about what they would do to crack down on tax avoidance and evasion. But the truth is, Mr. Deputy Speaker, they didn't. It's this government that has clamped down on avoidance and evasion. This government that has seen the tax gap cut by a quarter since 2010 to a record low, and this government that has raked in an extra £160 billion over 7 years for our public services by collecting the taxes that are due. So I'm going to take no lectures, but I will take action, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and this budget continues the work of the last 7 years with a further package of measures that is forecast to raise £4.8 billion by 2022-23, doing the job that Labour failed to do for 13 years in office. Mr. Deputy Speaker, our long-term phased reduction of corporation tax has generated investment and jobs and raised £20 billion extra for our public services. We are committed to maintaining Britain's competitive corporation tax rates, but there is a case now for removing the anomaly of the indexation allowance for capital gains, bringing the corporate tax system into line with the personal capital gains tax system. I will therefore freeze this allowance so that companies receive relief for inflation up to January 2018, but not thereafter. I'm grateful to the Office for Tax Simplification for their recent report on the VAT registration threshold. At £85,000, the UK's VAT threshold is by far the highest in the OECD. By contrast, in Germany, it is just £15,600. I note the OTS conclusion that it distorts competition and disincentivises business growth. I also note the Federation of Small Businesses' concerns about the cliff edge of the threshold. But such a high threshold also has the benefit of keeping the majority of small businesses out of VAT altogether. So I am not minded to reduce the threshold. But I will consult on whether its design could better incentivise growth, and in the meantime we will maintain it at its current level of £85,000 for the next 2 years. Mr. Deputy Speaker, we can't build an economy fit for the future without supporting its backbone, our 5.5 million small businesses, who are responsible between them for nearly half of our private sector jobs. They give our economy its extraordinary vibrancy and resilience. But I recognise that many are feeling under pressure right now. And I know that what hard work it is to get a business off the ground, to get it to grow. So today, I want to do what we can to ease that pressure. Mr. Deputy Speaker, business rates represent a high fixed cost for small businesses. At Budget 2016, we introduced a package of business rate relief worth almost £9 billion, with a further £435 million in the spring budget. Today, I go further. We have listened to concerns about the potential costs of the annual uprating of business rates in April next year. And today, I will accept the representation of the British Chambers of Commerce, CBI and other business organisations and bring forward the planned switch from RPI to CPI by 2 years to April 2018, a move which is worth £2.3 billion to business over the next 5 years. I've also listened to businesses affected by the so-called staircase tax. We will change the law to ensure that where a business has been impacted by the Supreme Court ruling, it can have its original bill reinstated if it chooses and backdated. And I hope I can expect cross-party backing to speed that measure through Parliament. Mr. Deputy Speaker, 3 simple steps to solve the staircase tax. Well, what do they expect? It's the tax section. Mr. Deputy Speaker, to support the thousands of small pubs that are at the heart of so many of our communities, we'll extend the £1,000 discount for pubs with a rateable value of less than £100,000 for 1 more year to March 2019. And I've heard the concerns about the 5-yearly revaluation system. Shorter revaluation periods will reduce the size of changes in valuations. So I can announce today that after the next revaluation, future revaluations will take place every 3 years. This Conservative government listening to small business. Yeah. Mr. Deputy Speaker, there's a wider concern across this House and in the business community about the tax system in the digital age. Because along with innovation and growth that it brings, digitalisation poses challenges for the sustainability and fairness of our tax system. But this challenge can only properly be solved on an international basis, and the UK is leading the charge in the OECD and the G20 to find solutions. Today, we publish a position paper on the tax challenge posed by the digital economy, setting out our emerging thinking about potential solutions. But in the meantime, we will take what action we can. Multinational digital businesses pay billions of pounds in royalties to jurisdictions where they are not taxed, and some of these royalties relate to UK sales. So from April 2019, and in accordance with our international obligations, we will apply income tax to royalties relating to UK sales when those royalties are paid to a low-tax jurisdiction, even if they do not fall to be taxed in the UK under our current rules. Mr. Deputy Speaker, this will raise about £200 million a year. It does not solve the problem, but it does send a signal of our determination, and we will continue to work in the international arena to find a sustainable and fair long-term solution that properly taxes the digital businesses that operate in our cyberspace. And following representations from a number of my honourable friends, we are also taking further action to address online VAT fraud, which costs the taxpayer £1.2 billion per year, by making all online marketplaces jointly liable with their sellers for VAT, ensuring that sellers operating through them pay the right amount of VAT, just as we would expect retailers on our high street to do. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I want to turn to the challenge of the housing market. But before I do, I want to touch on the aftermath of the appalling events at Grenfell Tower. We have provided financial support for the victims of this terrible tragedy, and today I can announce we will provide Kensington and Chelsea Council with a further £28 million for mental health and counselling services, regeneration support for the surrounding areas, and to provide a new community space for local residents. This tragedy should never have happened, and we must ensure that nothing like it ever happens again. All local authorities and housing associations must carry out any identified necessary safety works as soon as possible. And if any local authority cannot access funding to pay for essential fire safety work, they should contact us immediately. I have said before, and I will say again today, we will not allow financial constraints to get in the way of any essential fire safety work. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I want to also address the issue of empty properties. It cannot be right to leave property empty when so many are desperate for a place to live. So we will legislate to give local authorities the power to charge a 100% council tax premium on empty properties. We will also launch a consultation on barriers to longer tenancies in the private rented sector and how we might encourage landlords to offer them to those tenants who want the extra security. I also want to say something about rough sleeping. It is unacceptable that in 21st century Britain there are people sleeping on the streets. So we'll invest today £28 million in 3 new Housing First pilots in the West Midlands, in Manchester and in Liverpool, and we'll establish a homelessness task force as part of our commitment to halving rough sleeping by 2022 and eliminating it by 2027. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'd like to thank the many colleagues who submitted ideas on how to tackle the challenge of the housing market, including my honourable friends for North East Hampshire, Eastleigh and Weston-super-Mare in particular. By continuing to invest in Britain's infrastructure, skills and R&D, we will ensure the recovery and productivity growth that is the key to delivering our vision of a stronger, fairer, more balanced economy and the assurance to the next generation of their economic security. But however successful we are in that endeavour, there is one area where young people today will rightly feel concern about their future prospects, and that is in the housing market. House prices are increasingly out of reach for many. It takes too long to save for a deposit, and rents absorb too high a portion of monthly income. So the number of 25 to 34-year-olds owning their own home has dropped from 59% to just 38% over the last 13 years. Put simply, successive governments over decades have failed to build enough homes to deliver the home-owning dream that this country has always been proud of, or indeed to meet the needs of those who rent. In Manchester a few weeks ago, my right honourable friend the Prime Minister made a pledge to Britain's younger generation that she would dedicate her premiership to fixing this problem, and today we take the next steps to delivering on that pledge by choosing to build. We send a message to the next generation that getting on the housing ladder is not just a dream of your parents' past, but a reality for your future. We've made a start with schemes like Help to Buy, which has helped over 320,000 people buy a home. We've increased the supply of homes. We've increased the supply of homes by more than 1.1 million since 2010, including nearly 350,000 affordable homes. House building stands at its highest level since the crash, with the latest figures showing that over 217,000 net additional homes were added to the stock last year. That is a remarkable achievement, but we need to do better still. Deputy Speaker, this is a complex challenge and there is no single magic bullet. If we don't increase the supply of land for new homes, more money will simply inflate prices and make matters worse. If we don't do more to support the growth of the SME house building sector that was all but wiped out by Labour's Great Recession, we will remain dependent on the major national house builders that dominate the industry. And if we don't train the construction workers of tomorrow, we may generate planning permissions, but we will not turn them into homes. So solving this challenge will require money, it will require planning reform, and it will require intervention. So today we set out an ambitious plan to tackle the housing challenge. Over the next 5 years, we will commit a total of at least £44 billion of capital funding, loans and guarantees to support our housing market. to boost the supply of skills, resources and building land, and to create the financial incentives necessary to deliver 300,000 net additional homes a year on average by the mid-2020s, the biggest annual increase in housing supply since 1970. New money for the Home Builders Fund to get SME house builders building again, a £630 million small sites fund to unstick the delivery of 40,000 homes, a further £2.7 billion to more than double the Housing Infrastructure Fund, £400 million more for estate regeneration, a £1.1 billion fund to unlock strategic sites, including new settlements and urban regeneration schemes, a lifting of HRA caps for councils in high-demand areas to get them building again, and £8 billion of new financial guarantees to support private house building and the purpose-built private rented sector. And because we need a workforce to build these new homes, we're providing an additional £34 million to develop construction skills across the country. Mr. Deputy Speaker, solving the housing challenge takes more than money, it takes planning reform. We will focus on the urban areas where people want to live and where most jobs are created, making best use of our urban land and continuing the strong protection of our green belt. In particular, building high-quality, high-density homes in city centres and around major transport hubs. And to put the needs of our young people first, we will ensure that councils in high-demand areas permit more homes for local first-time buyers and affordable renters. My right honourable friend, the Community Secretary, will set out more detail in a statement to the House in due course. However, one thing is very clear. There is a significant gap between the number of planning permissions granted and the number of homes built. In London alone, there are 270,000 residential planning permissions unbuilt. We need to understand why, Mr. Deputy Speaker. So I am establishing an urgent review to look at the gap between planning permissions and housing starts. It will be chaired by my right honourable friend, the member for West Dorset, and will deliver an interim report in time for the spring statement next year. And if that report finds that vitally needed land is being withheld from the market for commercial rather than technical reasons, we will intervene to change the incentives to ensure such land is brought forward for development using direct intervention, compulsory purchase powers as necessary. Mr. Deputy Speaker, my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, has said we will fix this problem, and no one should doubt the government's determination to do so. But the solution will not deliver itself. Local authorities will need help and support. Developers will need encouragement and persuasion. Infrastructure to facilitate higher density development must be funded and delivered. So the Homes and Communities Agency will expand to become Homes England, bringing together money, expertise and planning and compulsory purchase powers with a clear remit to facilitate delivery of sufficient new homes where they are most needed to deliver a sustained improvement in housing affordability. But, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the battle to achieve and sustain affordability will be a long-term one, so we also need to look beyond this Parliament to long-term measures. We will use new town development corporations to kickstart 5 new locally agreed garden towns in areas of demand pressure, delivered through public-private partnerships designed to attract long-term capital investment from around the world. Last week, the National Infrastructure Commission published their report on the Cambridge-Milton Keynes-Oxford corridor. Today, we back their vision and commit to building up to 1 million homes by 2050, completing the road and rail infrastructure to support them. And as a down payment on this plan, we've agreed an ambitious housing deal with Oxfordshire to deliver 100,000 homes by 2031. capitalising on the global reputations of our two most famous universities and Britain's biggest new town to create a dynamic new growth corridor for the 21st century. Mr. Deputy Speaker, this is our plan to deliver on the pledge we have made to the next generation, that the dream of home ownership will become a reality in this country once again. But I also want to take action today to help young people who are saving to own a home. One of the biggest challenges facing young first-time buyers is the cash required up front. We've put £10 billion more money into Help to Buy equity loan to help those saving for a deposit. But I want to do more still. I've received representations for a temporary stamp duty holiday to first-time buyers, but this would only help those who are ready to purchase now and would offer nothing for the many who will need to save for years. So with effect from today, for all first-time buyer purchases up to £300,000, I am abolishing stamp duty altogether.
If you want more, you're going to have to let the Chancellor finish. Chancellor of the Exchequer.
And, Mr. Deputy Speaker, to ensure that this relief also helps first-time buyers in very high-price areas like London, it will also be available on the first £300,000 of the purchase price of properties up to £500,000. Meaning an effective reduction of £5,000. Mr. Deputy Speaker, that is a stamp duty cut for 95% of all first-time buyers who pay stamp duty and no stamp duty at all for 80% of first-time buyers from today. Mr. Deputy Speaker, when we say we will revive the home-owning dream in Britain, we mean it. We do not underestimate the scale of the challenge, but today we have made a substantial down payment. Mr. Deputy Speaker, one of the things that I love most about this country is its sense of opportunity. I've always felt it, and I want young people growing up today to have that same sense of boundless opportunity. In this budget, I've set out a vision for Britain's future and a plan for delivering it. But by getting our debt down, by supporting British families and businesses, by investing in the technologies and the skills of the future, by creating the homes and the infrastructure our country needs, we are at a turning point in our history, and we resolve to look forwards, not backwards, to build on the strengths of the British economy, to embrace change, not hide from it, to seize the opportunities ahead of us, and together to build a Britain fit for the future. I commend this statement to the House.
So the Chancellor saving his big announcement until the end, the abolition of stamp duty for first-time buyers on all houses below 300,000 and that forgiveness continuing in value up to houses of £500,000. So he says that means 80% of first-time buyers won't be paying won't be paying stamp duty on their house purchases. Other than that, it's fair to say that it was a budget of a lot of measures tinkering against the background of some of the worst projections for growth from the Office of Budget Responsibility for a very long time. Well, let's get the reaction now of our political editor, Faisal Islam, who was listening to that. What did you make of it?
So the biggest measures were, of course, as you say, the stamp duty cut. It isn't just for any properties under 300,000, it's for property, the first £300,000 of a property worth up to 500,000, and just for first-time buyers. How they enforce that, I don't know. They've got some of these measures already that are just targeted at first-time buyers. That got a big cheers from the Conservative backbenchers. Comes at a time when the housing market is coming off the boil. And stamp duty revenues have been very buoyant over the past 12 months, partly as a result of charging more for second homes. So that's an interesting development, crowd pleaser, important in sending a message to those younger voters that did not back the Conservatives in great numbers at the election. The other big move seems to be about £1.5 billion made available to solve the universal credit issue. Very sensitive, the government, to what might happen as these pilot programmes extend across things in December.
Right, well, we can now go to Jeremy Corbyn replying to the budget.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The test of a budget is how it affects the reality of people's lives all around this country. And I would submit, Mr. Speaker, that the reality... Luke, if somebody wants to go for an early cup of tea, please do so. I'm told there's mince pies are waiting. But what I will have is the Leader of the Opposition listen to, and quietly from this side, in the same way I expected the other side of the House. Jeremy Corbyn. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The reality test of this budget has to be how it affects ordinary people's lives. And I believe as the days go ahead and this budget unravels, the reality will be a lot of people will be no better off, and the misery that many are in will be continuing. Pay, Mr. Speaker, is now lower than it was in 2010, and wages are now falling again. Economic growth in the first 3 quarters of this year is the lowest since 2009 and the slowest of the major economies in the G7. It's a record of failure with a forecast of more to come. Economic growth has been revised down. Productivity growth has been revised down. Business investment revised down. People's wages and living standards revised down. What sort of strong economy is that? What sort of fit for the future is that? You may recall, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the deficit was due to be eradicated by 2015. Then that moved to 2016, then to 2017, then 2020, and now we're looking at 2025. They're missing their major targets, but the failed and damaging policy of austerity remains. The number of people sleeping rough has doubled since 2010, and this Christmas, Mr. Deputy Speaker, 120,000 children will spend Christmas in temporary accommodation. 3 new pilot schemes to look at rough sleeping across the whole country simply doesn't cut it. We want action now to help those poor people that are forced to sleep on our streets and beg for the money. Order. I think the whip should know better. Mr. Spencer, I'm sure we can relax. If not, please, we don't need any more from me. If not, leave the chamber. Jeremy Corbyn. The point I was making, Mr. Speaker, 3 new pilot schemes for rough sleepers simply doesn't cut it. It is a disaster for those people sleeping on our streets, forced to beg for the money for a night shelter. They're looking for action now from government to give them a roof over their heads. In some parts of the country, Mr. Speaker, life expectancy is actually beginning to fall. The last Labour government lifted 1 million children out of poverty. It was an amazing achievement. Under this government, an extra 1 million children will be plunged into poverty by the end of this Parliament. 1.9 million pensioners, 1 in 6 of all pensioners, are living in poverty, the worst rate anywhere in Western Europe. So it's falling pay, slow growth and rising poverty, and this is what the Chancellor has the cheek to call a strong economy. His predecessors said they would put the burden on those with the broadest shoulders. So how's that turned out? The poorest tenth, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the poorest tenth of households will lose 10% of their income by 2022, while the richest will lose just 1%. So much for tackling burning injustices. This is a government tossing fuel on the fire. Personal debt levels are rising. 8.3 million people over-indebted. If he wants to help people out of debt, he should back Labour's policy for a real living wage of £10 an hour by 2020. Working-class young people now leaving university with £57,000 worth of debt because this government, his government, trebled tuition fees, and the new government policy is to win over young people by keeping fees at $9,250 per year. More debt for people who want to learn. But that is just one of the multitudes of injustices presiding over this government. Another is universal credit, which we called on the ministers to pause and fix. That's the view of this House. It's the verdict of those on the front line.
Mr. Pincher, to shout out, keep going, he will. But you'll be going out to the chamber. Jeremy Corbyn.
I would rather people stay to listen, actually, Mr. Deputy Speaker, to the reality.
Silence! That's the difference. Mr. Hoare, it will be in silence.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Maybe the benches opposite would like to listen to Martin's experience. A full-time worker on a minimum wage. He said, I get paid 4 weekly, meaning that my pay date is different each month. And because of under the universal credit system, he was paid twice in a month and deemed to have earned too much. His universal credit was cut off. This led me into rent arrears, and I had to use a food bank for the first time in my life. That is the humiliation that he and so many others have gone through because of the problems of universal credit. Wouldn't it have been better to pause the whole thing and look at the problems it has caused? The Chancellor's solution to a failing system causing more debt is to offer a loan. And the 6-week wait, with 20% waiting even longer, simply becomes a 5-week wait. This system has been run down by £3 billion of cuts to work allowances, the 2-child limit and the perverse and appalling rape clause, and caused evictions because housing benefit isn't paid direct to the landlord. So I say to the Chancellor again, put this system on hold so it can be fixed and keep 1 million of our children out of poverty. For years, we've had the rhetoric of, Deputy Speaker, a long-term economic plan that never meets its targets, when what all too many are experiencing is long-term economic pain. And hardest hit are disabled people, single parents and women. So it's disappointing the Chancellor did not back the campaign by my honourable friend, the member for Brent Central, to end period poverty. He could have done that. Well done her on the campaign. Shame on him for not supporting it. The Conservative manifesto in the last election disappeared off its website after 3 days. And now some ministers opposite have put forward some half-decent proposals conspicuously borrowed by from the Labour manifesto. Let me tell the Chancellor, Mr. Speaker, as socialists, we're happy to share ideas. The Community Secretary called 50 billion of borrowing to invest in house building. Presumably, the Prime Minister slapped him down for wanting to bankrupt Britain. The Health Secretary said the pay cap is over, but where is the money to fund the pay rise? The Chancellor has not been clear today, not for NHS workers, our police, firefighters, teachers, teaching assistants, bin collectors, tax collectors or armed forces personnel. So will the Chancellor listen to Claire, who says her mum works for the NHS? She goes above and beyond for her patients. Why does the government think it's OK to underpay, overstress and underappreciate all those that work within our NHS? The NHS Chief Executive says the budget for the NHS next year is well short of what is currently needed. And from what the Chancellor has said today, it's still going to be well short of what is needed. He said in 2015 they would fund another 5,000 GPs. But in the last year, 1,200, we've had 1,200 fewer GPs. And we've lost community nurses and mental health nurses. The Chancellor promised 10 billion in 2015 and delivered 4.5. So if you don't mind, we'll wait for the small print on today's announcement. But even what he said certainly falls well short of the 6 billion Labour would have delivered from our June manifesto. Over 1 million of our elderly aren't receiving the care they need. Over 6 billion will have been cut from social care budgets by next March. I hope the honourable member begins to understand what it's like to wait for social care, stuck in a hospital bed, or other people having to give up their work to care for them. The uncaring, uncouth attitude of certain members of to be called out.
Order. Carry on.
Mr. Speaker, that is why social care budgets are so important for so many very desperate people in our country. Our schools, Mr. Deputy Speaker, will be 5% worse off by 2019. Despite the Conservative manifesto promising no school would be worse off. 5,000 head teachers from 25 counties wrote to the Chancellor saying, "We are simply asking for the money that has been taken out of the system to be returned." A senior science technician wrote to me, Robert, saying, my pay has been reduced by over 30%. I've seen massive cuts at my school. Good teachers and support staff leave. That is what does for the morale of both teachers and students in school. According to this government, 5,000 head teachers are wrong, Robert is wrong, the IFS is wrong, everybody is wrong except the Chancellor. And if the Chancellor bothered to listen to what local government is saying, they have been warning that services for the most vulnerable children are under more demand than ever. Yes. More children being taken into care, more in desperate need of help and support. Yet they're labouring with a 2 billion shortfall in the cost of dealing with vulnerable children. Because local councils have lost 80%, will have lost 80% of their direct funding by 2020. And the reality of this, Mr. Speaker, across the country is women's refuges closing, youth centres closing, libraries closing, museums closing, public facilities understaffed, under-resourced and under-financed. It could be so different. But, Mr. Speaker, compassion can cost very little. Just £10 million is needed to establish the Child Funeral Fund campaigned for so brilliantly by my honourable friend, the member for Swansea East. Why couldn't the Chancellor have at least agreed to fund that? Under this government, there are also 20,000 fewer police officers and another 6,000 community support officers and 11,000 fire service staff have been cut as well. You cannot keep communities safe on the cheap. Tammy explains this. Our police presence has been taken away from her village, meaning increasing crime. As a single parent, I no longer feel safe in the village where I live, particularly at night. Mr. Speaker, 5.5 million workers earn less than the living wage, 1 million more than 5 years ago. And the Chancellor last Sunday couldn't even see 1.4 million people unemployed in this country. There is a crisis of low pay and insecure work, affecting 1 in 4 women and 1 in 6 men. A record 7.4 million people in working households living in poverty. If we want workers earning better pay, less dependent on in-work benefits, we need strong trade unions. We need the most effective way of boosting workers' pay. Instead, this government weakened trade unions and introduced employment tribunal fees, now scrapped thanks to the victory in the courts by Unison, a trade union representing its members. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, why didn't the Chancellor take the opportunity to make 2 changes to control debt? Firstly, to cap credit card debt so that nobody pays back more than they borrowed. And secondly, to stop credit card companies increasing people's credit limit without their say-so. Debt is being racked up because the government is weak on those who exploit people, such as rail companies hiking up fares above inflation year on year, and water companies and energy suppliers. During the general election, it promised an energy cap that would benefit around 17 million families on standard variable tariffs. But every bill tells millions of families the government has broken that promise. And with 10 billion in housing benefit going into the pockets of private landlords every year, housing is a key factor in driving up the welfare bill. Not too many words from the Chancellor about the excessive levels of rent in the private rented sector. With this government delivering the worst rate of house building since the 1920s and a quarter a quarter of 1 million fewer council homes, any commitment would be welcome. But we've been here before. The government promised 200,000 starter homes 3 years ago. Not a single one has yet been built in those 3 years. We need a large-scale, publicly funded house-building programme, not this government's accounting tricks and empty promises. Yes, we back the abolition of stamp duty for first-time buyers because it was another Labour policy in our manifesto in June, not a Tory one. And this government continues preference for spin over substance. That means across this country the words Northern Powerhouse and Midlands Engine are now met with derision. Yorkshire and Humber get only 1/10 of the transport investment per head given to London. And government figures show that every region in the north of England has seen a fall in spending on services since 2012. The Midlands, East and West, is receiving less than 8% of total transport infrastructure investment, compared with 50% going to London. In the East and West Midlands, 1 in 4 workers are paid less than the living wage. So much for the Midlands Engine. Re-announced funding for the Transpennine rail route won't cut it, and today's other announcements won't redress that balance. Productive austerity, this lack of investment has consequences in sluggish growth and shrinking pay brackets. Public investment has virtually halved. Under this government, Britain has the lowest rate of public investment in the G7. But it's now investing in driverless cars after months of road testing backseat driving in the government. by moving from RPI to CPI indexation on business rates, the Chancellor has adopted another Labour policy. But why don't they go further and adopt Labour's entire business rates pledge, including exempting plant and machinery and annual revaluation of business rates? Nowhere has their chaos been more evident than over Brexit. Following round after round of fruitless Brexit negotiations, the Brexit Secretary has been shunted out for the Prime Minister, who has got no further. Every major business organisation has written to the government telling them to pull their finger out and get on with it. Businesses are delaying crucial investment decisions because if this government doesn't get its act together soon, they will be taking relocation decisions. Crashing out with no deal and turning Britain into a tax haven will damage people's jobs and living standards, serving only a wealthy few. It's not as if this government isn't doing its best to protect tax havens and their clients in the meantime. The Paradise Papers have again exposed how a super-rich elite is allowed to get away with dodging taxes. This government has opposed measure after measure in this House and their Tory colleagues in the European Parliament to clamp down on the tax havens that facilitate this outrageous leeching from our public purse. Non-paid tax, clever reinvestment to get away with tax, actually hits hospitals, schools, housing, and hits the poorest and most needy in our society. There's nothing moral about dodging tax. There's everything immoral about evading it. Mr. Speaker, too often it feels like there is one rule for the super-rich and another for the rest of us. The horrors of Grenfell Tower were a reflection of a system that puts profits before people, that fails to listen to working-class communities. In 2013, the government received advice in a coroner's report that sprinklers should be fitted in all high-rise buildings. Today, once again, the government failed to fund the £1 billion investment needed. The Chancellor says the council should contact them. But Nottingham has, Westminster has, and they've been refused. Nothing was offered to them. We, Mr. Speaker, have the privilege to be members of Parliament in a building that is about to be retrofitted with sprinklers to protect us. The message is pretty clear. This government cares more about what happens here than happens to people living in high-rise homes. In effect, saying they matter less. Our country, Mr. Speaker, is marked by growing inequality and injustice. We were promised with lots of hype a revolutionary budget. The reality is nothing has changed. People were looking for help from this budget and they've been let down. Let down by a government that, like the economy they presided over, is weak and unstable and in need of urgent change. They call this a budget fit for the future. The reality is this is a government no longer fit for office.
Nicky Morgan!
So the Leader of the Opposition, Jeremy Corbyn, tearing into the budget, saying he's very angry with it and saying that it won't address the social problems, that people will go on being hard-pressed and that public services will go on being underfunded. Well, we've now been given the documents by the government, which means that we can analyse in a bit more detail what is actually in the budget. I mean, here's one that's perhaps worth looking at. This is the impact on households, and as you can see, the bottom 90% of households are better off in terms of tax, welfare and benefits. The top 10% are a little bit worse off. And Fazl Islam, that really underlines the fact that if you are looking at the balance of this, the Chancellor is giving people back more than he's taking in taxation.
This is really unusual for the first year of a Parliament. What tends to happen, the pattern that we've seen over 20, 30 years, is you get the tough decisions in the first budget of a Parliament, perhaps that were hidden from the electorate. You get a tax rise maybe or some spending cuts, then you create a kind of well to take from in the later years as you go up next. This reverses that. This is a giveaway budget, and it's quite considerable. If you tot it all up over 5 years, you get up to about 20-25 billion of giveaways on both tax and spending. 29 billion pounds extra in borrowing, even though there's less borrowing this year and borrowing goes down in each year, which was the claim the Chancellor made in the Commons there. The amount of borrowing forecast now set against the last budget has overall gone up by just under 30 billion. Just a giveaway. There are some fiscal conservatives who I'm sure will be have their eyebrows raised at some of that. Indeed, perhaps Jeremy Corbyn should have welcomed the fact that there's more borrowing to invest. And the key line items are extra spending on NHS, which is a big winner, and also that extra spending on Brexit, 1.5 billion a year in the next 2 years.
OK, Faisal, we'll have lots more analysis. Just to remind you, it's just past 3 o'clock. We stayed with Jeremy Corbyn's live contribution in the House of Commons there. Now, it was billed as a vision for post-Brexit Britain, an opportunity, as the Chancellor put it, to run towards change, not run away from it. And he said an extra £3 billion a year will be set aside over the next 2 years to prepare for every possible budget outcome. But the Chancellor also revealed that growth and productivity forecasts have had to be downgraded yet again, though inflation is due to return to its 2% target over the next year. Philip Hammond's budget included at least £44 billion of funding to support the housing market for the next 5 years. £2.8 billion of extra money for the NHS in England over 3 years, though no immediate pay rise for nurses. And a £1.5 billion package to cut the waiting time for universal credit. While the final surprise measure was the abolition of stamp duty for first-time buyers purchasing properties worth up to £300,000. The Chancellor first announced a £3 billion war chest for Brexit.
This government will make the pursuit of that progress a top priority in the weeks ahead. But, Mr. Deputy Speaker, while we work to achieve this deep and special partnership, we are determined to ensure that the country is prepared for every possible outcome.
His productivity figures were downbeat.
Regrettably, our productivity performance continues to disappoint. The OBR has assumed at each of the last 16 fiscal events that productivity growth would return to its pre-crisis trend of about 2% a year, but it has remained stubbornly flat. So today, they revised down the outlook for productivity growth, business investment and GDP growth across the forecast period.
The Chancellor announced changes to the universal credit system, shortening the waiting time from 6 weeks to 5.
We will remove the 7-day waiting period applied at the beginning of a benefit claim so that entitlement to universal credit will start on the day of the claim. To provide greater support during the waiting period, we will change the advances system to ensure that any household that needs it can access a full month's payment within 5 days of applying.
And he announced significant funding for the NHS, though stopped short of a pay rise for nurses.
We acknowledge that the service remains under pressure, and today we respond. First, we will deliver an additional £10 billion package of capital investment in frontline services over the course of this Parliament to support the sustainability and transformation plans which will make our NHS more resilient, investing for an NHS fit for the future. But we also recognise that the NHS is under pressure right now. I am therefore exceptionally and outside the spending review process making an additional commitment of resource funding of £2.8 billion to the NHS in England.
Then came the larger spending announcements, £44 billion of funding for housing and plans to abolish stamp duty on some homes.
Over the next 5 years, we will commit a total of at least £44 billion of capital funding, loans and guarantees to support our housing market, to boost the supply of skills, resources and building land, and to create the financial incentives necessary to deliver 300,000 net additional homes a year on average by the mid-2020s, the biggest annual increase in housing supply since 1970. I've received representations for a temporary stamp duty holiday to first-time buyers, but this would only help those who are ready to purchase now and would offer nothing for the many who will need to save for years. So with effect from today...
In response, the Labour leader attacked the government over the cuts to social care budgets.
I hope the honourable member begins to understand what it's like to wait for social care stuck in a hospital bed or other people having to give up their work to care for them. The uncaring, uncouth attitude of certain members of to be called out.
Order.
Well, we can look now at some of the budget's main measures with our economics editor, Ed Conway, who's been analysing it at Sky News Centre. Ed.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. And really, this was one of the big stories, and you've referred to it just there, these big cuts to the economic forecast. That's one of the things that's obviously focused on a lot at the time of the budget. And just look at these red bars. That shows you just how fast the OBR, the Office of Budget Responsibility, thought the economy was going to grow at the time of the spring budget. So, you know, you're talking about 2% this year. You're talking about 2% towards the end of the forecast horizon. Now, here's the news today. Big cuts every single year. And what does this come down to? It's the fact that the OBR no longer thinks that the UK's long-term growth potential is as strong as it was. This is the first time in modern history that we've had GDP forecasts throughout the forecast horizon that have all been below 2%. So it's a slower growing UK economy, and as a result of that, times are tougher for the Chancellor. Nonetheless, he has managed to find some interesting areas to give away. And Faisal was saying just a moment ago there, this is a giveaway budget, but perhaps not giving away in those areas where you might have thought. So we knew the universal credit, that was going to be improved there in terms of the waiting time for universal credit. £1.5 billion package there. VAT, the threshold maintained at £85,000 for each business. Actually, the Chancellor might have liked to have cut that. It just shows how cautious he was, though. He was worried about what happened last time around with national insurance and Brexit. Now, this is something the Chancellor mentioned right at the start of his address. £3 billion extra for Brexit preparations. In fact, if you look at the first year, this is the single biggest line item. It's about £1.5 billion over next year to pay for whatever happens in the event of Brexit. That is a lot of money. It's much more than for stamp duty. It's more than for almost any other measure that we've heard about today. And then there are the other items that we heard about. The NHS. Now, this extra money for the NHS is the second biggest thing that appears in the budget. Again, bigger than stamp duty in terms of the amount that it's going to cost. £2.8 billion for the NHS in England. It's about £1.5 billion for a few years. So similar cost to that Brexit legislation as well. So basically it's Brexit and the NHS in terms of the big numbers. But here is the big eye catcher: stamp duty cut for first-time buyers up to £300,000. And of course that also goes for those buying in London who are buying properties that are more than that. It's just they won't pay stamp duty on the first £300,000. And house building. Well, the Chancellor and indeed the Prime Minister have talked about how they want to raise the number of new homes being built. He did mention there is no magic bullet here. He talked about the fact that it's going to take more than just a little more money for building homes to actually sort out this housing crisis. But nonetheless, we do have a suite of measures, and it is unusual in this first budget of a new government to have a big giveaway like this. It is a big giveaway, billions of pounds every single year for the next forecast horizon. The problem, though, for the Chancellor is it's into an economy which is not performing as fast as he would like it to.
Ed, thank you very much indeed. Well, with me is the Treasury Minister, Mel Stride, the Financial Secretary to the Treasury. Welcome to you. So now we've got proof. Brexit is costing the British taxpayer money, £3 billion. That's a lot of money.
Well, we've already invested £700 million in Brexit, and what the Chancellor is saying today, quite
good money
prudently,
after bad.
well, quite sensibly, is that we must make sure that this country is fully prepared to take full advantage of what Brexit has to offer, and that means £3 billion.
But it's costing us money. It's costing the taxpayer money. It's costing us a further £3 billion.
Well, it's absolutely right and proper that we make proper provision to make sure that we are ready on day one for when we leave the European Union. So I think he would have been very heavily criticised if he just said, well, we don't need anything to get ready. So he's done the right thing.
Instead of which he's
well, we've already, as you will know from the Chancellor's speech, £6.3 billion extra for the health service, including a third of a billion to get us through the winter, so that we make sure that the NHS is able to cope and to meet its targets going forward.
Now let's talk about this 44 billion for house building. Of course, Sajid Javid wanted 50 billion. But actually, analysing the figures, it's only 15 billion of new money. That's right, isn't it?
Well, the total investment across the period will be a bit in excess of £44 billion. There will be £15 billion of additional finance that's going in as a consequence of this budget. But the important point here, Adam, is that we delivered 217,000 new homes in the last year. That's the largest delivery in the last decade, but we have greater aspirations than that. So our determination is to get up to the 300,000 new builds that we believe to be appropriate to start to get the housing accessibility issue that we have under control.
And what is the point of the stamp duty forgiveness on houses below 300,000 for first-time buyers?
Well, quite simply to assist those who want to get onto the housing ladder, as perhaps you and I in our day were more able to be able to do exactly that. So we're saying that up to £300,000, that first £300,000 will be entirely exempt from stamp duty for first-time buyers, and indeed that will relate to any property that's up to a value of 500,000, recognising, for example, in major cities like London, that property is very expensive.
But the problem is the Office of Budget Responsibility report, it says, look, take the stamp duty off and that will just simply go to inflate the price that people have to pay, so they won't be any better off.
We've got to do two things here. One is we've got to help people, particularly first-time buyers, many of whom are younger people in our country, onto the housing ladder. The second thing is we've got to rightly resolve the issue of supply, which is why we are investing over £44 billion over the next 5 years to make sure that we increase, as we have been doing already, the number of new homes being built.
But, I mean, the OBR basis says it's a waste of money.
Well, I don't think the OBR would be saying it's a waste of money.
Well, it's not going to benefit people in terms of making their homes cheaper.
Is we need to do two things. Firstly, we need to go the extra mile for predominantly young people seeking to get that first home of their own, and we think that's an important aspiration in life. We want to give them a leg up, and that stamp duty change will be worth about £5,000 for those who are investing in a property of around £300,000. But we also need to tackle supply. And so what we're doing is both putting more money in, which is where the 44 billion in total comes from, but also looking at the way that the planning system works whilst protecting the green belt, making sure that we free up those sites, particularly where there's existing planning consent and they're not being built on. We will be more interventionist and we will make sure that that building starts.
I mean, normally at this first year of an election cycle, you would expect the government to take some hard decisions to get the economy moving. You've gone for a net giveaway. I mean, that basically is a signal that you know this government can't last the full time.
Well, what we've done is for a balanced approach. So on the fiscal issues, we are still, and the OBR have confirmed this, on target to meet our interim targets for 2020-21, and that is that the deficit will be falling below 2% by that time, and the debt will be falling as a percentage of GDP. We will actually meet those targets, and the OBR has confirmed this 2 years early, as well as sticking to our target by the middle of the next decade to have eliminated the deficit altogether. But look, there's more to do. The average household debt in this country is around £65,000, so we have to continue to act. So what we're doing today is making a balanced approach to continue with our fiscal targets and meet those targets whilst helping out those who have been squeezed, particularly by increasing inflation in recent times.
And was this the budget for the North? I mean, most of their infrastructure projects are now on hold, aren't they?
Well, there's plenty for the North in terms of new rail stock, in terms of city deals, in terms of the industrial...
no new construction of rail lines or...
Well, there'll be an industrial strategy which we will be announcing very shortly, and we have announced in this budget actually additional monies that will go into the Better Cities projects around transport, so they will go out through the new metro mayors, some of it just half of it given out. This is over £1 billion in total, and half of it will be there to be bid for through competition. So we are, as the Chancellor said in his speech, completely committed to the Midlands engine, the Northern Powerhouse, and to make sure that all parts of our country benefit from the measures that we're taking.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Government Minister there reacting. Well, how has it gone down in the north of England? Kay Burley is in Leeds. Kay.
It's a great question, Adam. Yeah, very good afternoon from the Corn Exchange here, right in the very centre of Leeds. That's certainly what the politicians think about how the North is going to benefit from this, the latest budget from the Chancellor. But what about the voters up here in Leeds? Do they think there have been any early Christmas presents for them? We'll be chatting to them in just a moment. Stay tuned our way. Hello again from the Corn Exchange here in Leeds. An immediate reaction to the Chancellor's first autumn budget. I wonder how much joy he has brought to the people here in the Northern Powerhouse of Leeds today. Certainly there were more jokes than a Peter Kay tour, weren't there? But what do the people of Leeds think about what he had to say? Lots of people saying hello today. Hello! Did you see the Chancellor's budget? Don't know what he's doing yet. Well, yeah, check it out on Sky News later on. Some people who have been watching it for us, though, is here Dion Smith in his studio. Hi, Dion. Live on Sky News. Can we have a quick chat?
Yeah, sure.
What did you make of what the Chancellor had to say?
I thought it was the budget were okay. I thought it played it safe, to be fair. I mean, it touched on the VAT threshold. Personally, I think small businesses like myself should be eased into at the VAT rate, rather than a 20% rate just dumped on, having to dump them onto your prices. I think it should be eased in at a lower rate and then increased accordingly to your turnover. Yeah.
How do you think what he was saying would have any impact on small businesses? We hear a lot about the Northern Powerhouse, don't we? Do you feel that there were any particular measures that will help people in the North?
Not really. I think, like I say, I think he just kept it safe. There weren't really that many big changes. Personally, I don't think there's anything that'll change for me.
There was a lot of conversation before the budget about old versus young and whether or not people could get onto the property ladder, and also about travel and millennials potentially getting a better deal when it comes to commuting. Do you find that that's a big issue here in Leeds? Something like 300,000 new homes a year are going to be built, is what the Chancellor is pledging, and that's the size of Leeds, the number of homes that are in Leeds at the moment.
Yeah, the threshold is okay, but I mean it only applies to literally single people. If you're a couple and one of you has had a property in the past, it don't apply. So it really cuts down the numbers there. And then as well, I mean, how many first-time buyers is there? You know, over £200,000 really. I think that cuts the numbers down as well. So I don't think he's really giving much away, to be fair.
Out of 10, what would you give it?
I'd say that's 7.
7's all right. I think he'll go with that. That's a very Len Godman strong 7. Thanks very much indeed.
Cheers.
Thanks a lot. If you want a reminder of what the Chancellor actually said as far as housing is concerned, let's have a quick listen.
For 95% of all first-time buyers who pay stamp duty and no stamp duty at all for 80% of first-time buyers from today. Mr Deputy Speaker, when we say we will revive the home-owning dream in Britain, we mean it.
Well, that's what the Chancellor was saying. Just hearing, though, from Dion, he didn't feel that was making much difference, really, as far as he and many of his customers are concerned. Let's go into the All Blues company, though, because what the owner here is particularly concerned about Brexit and how much money it's going to cost us to leave Brexit. Hello to you. Hi, you're live on Sky News just at the moment. Now, a lot of your products come in from France, don't they?
Yes, France and Italy and Germany as well.
OK, so you heard what the Chancellor had to say about Brexit and how much potentially it might cost us in the United Kingdom to leave, in addition to what we've already heard about. What impact will it have on your business?
Well, at the moment we're getting lots of products from like all over the world, like say Japan, America, and we're paying a lot of import tax as well. If we leave Europe, which we will, we're going to have to be paying nearly the same import tax as we're buying it from outside the EU, especially from France, because we get a lot of brands from France.
So what impact will that have on your business?
Lose money, obviously.
Will you be able to stay in business, though, I'm guessing?
Stay in business.
But you'll
well,
have to pass that on to your customers. In other words, prices will go up.
100%. Like the way in Norway now. Like in Norway, we get a lot of customers from Norway complaining about how expensive Norway is comparing to England, let's say. And we're going to become like Norway. Kind of, like if the prices go up, we automatically have to put the prices up.
Now, the Chancellor will say, as part of his budget today, he was doing what he could to try to help small businesses. He's been talking about VAT. He's been talking about business taxes as well. Any of the measures that he announced today that you feel will in any way counter the effects of Brexit?
To be honest, I've only seen the stamp duty, the solar so I've not heard anything. I don't know about. I'm still looking, as you see.
Yeah, but more generally, then, you know, obviously you have a home that you live in, and you have to commute as well. We've heard a lot about that. We've heard a lot about the northern powerhouses and the fact that the government's doing what it can to help people in the north. Do you feel that that's benefiting you?
In a way, yeah. Well.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah.
If you feel that, I mean, we're not looking necessarily for negativity. We're seeing how it impacts on shop owners.
I mean, so far so good. So you know.
Okay. And do you live in Leeds? Do you find it an expensive place to live?
It's not. It's cheaper than down south. So.
Is that right?
Yes, it is, yeah.
Okay, because we were chatting to some people earlier, and they were saying it's a very expensive city to live in, and so they have to live further out of the city, and as a result, they have to deal with commuting expenses.
Yes, I do. I live about 10 miles away in a place called Wakefield. So.
I know where Wakefield is. I'm from the north as well.
Sorry, sorry. And I commute every day. I drive, and I pay for parking as well every day. So.
Okay. So out of 10, what would you give the Chancellor for his budget today?
Probably 1 or 2. Maximum.
Goodness me. Has it changed the way that you're planning to vote at the next election as a result of what you've heard today?
Yeah.
Okay, can I ask which way you're going to vote? Go on, tell me. Go on,
Labour,
tell me. I won't tell
Labour,
anybody. Go on, Labour. Okay. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Thanks a lot. So, yeah, you too. I think he told me to chill out. So, as I said, we're right in the centre of the Corn Exchange. This building has been refurbished twice in the last 30 years. This is what you would describe as part of the refurbishment of the north that we've heard so much about from politicians in the south. We'll be hearing from one of those politicians in just a moment in the form of Vince Cable.
Well, welcome back to Sky News rolling coverage of today's budget. It was a net giveaway, and perhaps the biggest headline issue you can see here at the bottom of the screen are plans to build 300,000 new homes a year, and also forgiveness of stamp duty for first-time buyers on houses up to £500,000. Now, Faisal Islam's been looking at the small print of the budget documents, and this could be a problem for the Chancellor.
Well, the Office of Budget Responsibility, the independent economic experts, have had a look at that stamp duty policy, which was marketed as helping first-time buyers, and the headline seems to be, it's 5,000 roughly off stamp duty for first-time buyers. If you look at page 128 of the OBR document, it says the main gainers from the policy are people who already own property, not the first-time buyers themselves. In fact, it argues that post-stamp duty prices paid by first-time buyers would actually be higher with the relief than without it. So that is, the value of this reduction in stamp duty doesn't just add on to the house price, but it could be even more, negating the benefit of the stamp duty. Now, there'll be some who are constrained in their borrowing who will be able to access house purchases that they otherwise wouldn't, but they would have to buy at more expensive prices. So for something that will be marketed very heavily as a great boost to young people, this is the government's own independent fiscal watchdog saying the benefit goes to the older generation that already owns property.
OK, Faisal, thank you very much indeed. Well, let's get the views now of the leader of the Liberal Democrat Party, who is, of course, an economist. Do you agree with that analysis of the Office of Budget Responsibility? Basically a waste of money for giving this.
Well, we all want to help first-time buyers, but as Faisal's indicated, this will probably be counterproductive. It will drive up price and make it more difficult to get the market.
So you wouldn't have done it if you was...
Well, it wouldn't have been my top priority. The priority for first-time buyers is to get more homes built. I mean, there were some good, sensible things in the budget about that. I welcome it, but it's not on the scale that I think most independent analysts believe was right.
I mean, 300,000 homes,
well,
new
the
homes built a year.
The ambition is right,
Yeah,
but
I mean,
how are we going to get it? I mean, they've got things like these, green new towns. I mean, governments have been talking about that for 10 years. I mean, it's delivery that matters, and the 44 billion they're talking about in terms of additional funding, well, that's good, but a lot of it is guarantees. It's very indirect. And I don't think we're talking about the scale of government commitment that's necessary to deliver that target, though some of it is welcome.
So given where we are with predictions for growth coming down, this big cost of preparing for Brexit of £3 billion, do you think this was the right budget for the Times?
He had very, very little room for manoeuvre, and you've just hit the two key central points. That we're talking about a slowdown in growth. We're falling further and further behind other developed economies. Interestingly, he referred at the beginning to Britain being the 6th biggest economy in the world. It's no longer the 5th. We've fallen behind France. We're going to go even further down with slower growth, and that means at the end of the Parliament we're, I think, £700 per head poorer than we would have been on the original forecast. A lot of that is Brexit driven. We've now got this big allocation of funding in case Brexit crash out occurs. That's more than they're setting aside for additional funding for the NHS. I think a lot of people will be very disappointed by that.
So, if you put it together, were there enough measures there to try and reverse this prospect?
There were some good things. I mean, there was a lot of stuff around the industrial strategy that I very much welcomed, and had I still been in government, the things I would have been pushing for. But, you know, the problem is Brexit sits like a great weight over the economy. It's slowing the economy down, producing less government revenue, weakening the government's capacity to do things in public services.
Now, quite often the first budget after a general election is a kind of reshaping, trying to change the direction of the economy. Did you get that sense from Philip Hammond today?
There isn't. I mean, a lot of the rhetoric was perfectly good, and, you know, we need to address issues of fairness, the younger generation. I mean, all the language was fine, but the problem, he's so now heavily hemmed in. We've got this low productivity, we've got the costs of Brexit, we've got large amounts of government debt, and these three big constraints are enormously limiting what the government can do.
I mean, given that, do you think the government is right that, you know, the message was fairly ebullient, lots of jokes, we're optimistic about the future, the Prime Minister said at Prime Minister's Question Time before. Do you think that's the right, honest message to give the voters?
I like the jokes. I don't think anybody has thought Phil Hammond had it in him, but no, there were good jokes and quite a lot of them. But actually, it's not his forecast. I mean, it's the independent reviewers, the OBR, who say the economy is slowing down and it's falling well below other developed countries. And that's the news. It's not politicians' opinions. That's the reality we're dealing with.
What didn't you like in it?
What did I like in it?
What didn't you like in the budget?
I think the modesty of the efforts on housing, they fall, I think, way below what Sajid Javid was arguing for, let alone others. I think the thing that really worries me is their projections for public spending, which are very, very tiny growth that somehow got to accommodate public sector pay. Nothing like enough, I think, in terms of the NHS to deal with the crisis they're facing.
So would you have borrowed more even if that had meant not having this downward trajectory in annual borrowing?
No, the Liberal Democrats' vote was not actually to argue for more borrowing for current spending. It said that we should just be honest. If we want better services like better health, we've got to pay for it. And indeed, we argued for a penny in the pound in England to do it. And I think that's a much more straightforward, honest way of improving services without increasing government borrowing.
So you might actually put up taxes, whereas...
On certain key areas, we would have done, yes.
And do you think this is going to be Philip Hammond's last budget?
Probably not. I mean, what's the alternative? Same problem as with the Prime Minister. He's come under a lot of fire from his own side, but it's not obviously they can do any better with anybody else.
So it's not an omni-shambles budget and should be enough to sort of keep the government staggering on in minorities.
Well, the omni-shambles tends to emerge 24 hours later when people like Faisal have been digging in all the detail. But as it stands at the moment, it's just a bit on the grim side, and that's and it's lightened by some good, sensible things around industrial strategy and the rest. But the overall story is of an economy that's not going anywhere very fast, and we're going to up against very tight constraints.
Vince Cable, leader of the Liberal Democrats, thank you very much indeed. Well, we can have a look now at some of the budget's main measures. The man to do that is our economics editor, Ed Conway, at Sky News Centre. Ed.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. Well, let's have a look inside the Red Book. This is the book that contains all of the workings, all of the detail on precisely what's inside this budget. And the striking thing, from my position, looking at these numbers, is over the course of the next few years, so the next 2 or 3 years, this is the biggest giveaway budget that we've seen from the Conservatives for some time. And let's just have a look at some of those measures to give you a sense of what I'm talking about here. Now, we heard about stamp duty, NHS and Brexit. I'll come back to those in a second. But there were other measures, of course, as well. House building. Most of that spending on house building is kind of spread over the course of the next few years. And as the Chancellor said, you're talking about lots of different policies there, changes to planning reform and so on. So that's not something that involves an immediate massive bit of spending. Universal credit as well, though, so that's going to be relaxed in terms of the waiting times that you have to wait before you claim it. VAT, he didn't go ahead with that change to VAT that some people thought he might, where that VAT threshold that businesses, before businesses actually have to start paying VAT. It's very high at the moment, 85,000 in the UK, highest in the EU, but he's not going to bring that down. He's going to have a consultation on it. I think he would have rather actually brought it down, but he's still a bit scarred by what happened 6 months ago. Nonetheless, let's have a look at these. Which of these would you think is the most expensive policy of all? Stamp duty, NHS or Brexit? Well, let's have a look first of all at stamp duty and specifically how much it's costing each year. And here you can see these arrows show you that's money leaving the Treasury, so money going out to people in the country. And as you'd expect with a tax cut, that is money going out of the Exchequer towards people, indeed in this case first-time buyers. So you're talking about £600 million a year in terms of how much that is going to cost. Now, how does that compare with, for instance, the NHS policies the Chancellor talked about earlier on? Well, compare what we're talking about there, so about £600 million a year, to this. And it is a lot bigger, at least for the first few years. This is current spending on the NHS. On top of that, you've also got investment spending. But you're talking about £3 billion, about £3 and a bit billion over the course of the next few years. This is real money, real extra spending for the NHS, more or less in line with the manifesto, but it could actually go well beyond what the Conservatives are talking about for the manifesto. So that is a genuine increase in money for the NHS and brings the total amount the government is spending to about kind of 6 to 7 billion in those first few years. But also have a look at this, Brexit. The Chancellor mentioned this very early on in his speech, so you might almost have missed it. But here it is. We're talking about £3 billion of extra money to be spent on Brexit. This is the war chest. This is the war chest preparing the UK for whatever happens over the course of 2018 to 2020 when the UK leaves the EU. A lot of people have been calling for the Chancellor to prepare this kind of money. Here it is. £3 billion amounts to about £115 for every household in the UK. So quite a lot of money there. The Chancellor's spending a lot of money. He's borrowing a lot of money as well. And part of the reason why he's having to do that is that growth isn't coming in as high as he would like it. This is what was forecast last time around for GDP growth in the next few years. So economic growth, the UK economy, total amount of income, and it's 2%. It's 2% at the start, it's 2% at the end. How does that compare with what we've just heard today? Well, let's have a look at the new figures, and they are lower in every single year. In fact, this is the very first time in modern history that we've had a forecast from the Treasury, or indeed the OBR, who do it nowadays, that has been below 2% for every single year of the forecast horizon. It's the most pessimistic forecast we have had from an official government source ever. And that just underlines how difficult is the challenge facing the Chancellor. As a result of that, he has to borrow a lot more in order to pay for all of those things I mentioned.
Ed, thank you. This is Sky News. Coming up, more analysis of today's budget. Well, more reaction now to today's budget. With me is Kirsty Blackman. She is the SNP's economy spokesman, of course, an MP here at Westminster. Welcome to you. What did you make of that budget?
Well, it didn't really tackle the major issues that we're facing, did it? It didn't really tackle Brexit effectively. It didn't really give certainty to businesses for the future. It didn't signal a climb down from austerity, which we know has failed. So, all in all, it didn't do a huge amount to inspire confidence in this chaotic government.
Did give more money to Scotland and sorted out this whole problem of VAT for your emergency services.
Well, it sorted out the problem for VAT for emergency services going forward from April 2018, but he made no commitment on the £140 million that we've spent already. If the Chancellor agrees that that's unfair, he should refund that money to Scotland.
Just explain this. I mean, people in the rest of the UK probably not up to speed on this.
So Scotland changed the structure of the police and fire services. Actually, the Tories supported us in changing the structure of the police services.
Scotland and the rest.
Yeah, so it meant that Police Scotland suddenly had to pay that. which Police Northern Ireland doesn't have to do, which other national bodies like London Legacy have had exemptions from, but he didn't build in that exemption for Scotland in the past. So it's good that he's doing it going forward, but he needs to give us the rebate as well.
Is he right, though, do you think, that having more Scottish Conservative MPs actually means that Scotland as a whole has more leverage on this Tory government?
Well, the other thing that he spoke about was the transferable tax history for oil and gas, which Tory MPs in Scotland seem to be trying to claim as a victory for them. It was first announced by a Chancellor in 2016 before they were elected. It was first raised by me in the Commons in March 2016, which was before the budget in 2016. So I don't think there's a huge amount of credit can be given to Tory MPs for these things.
Now, you see, he didn't deal with Brexit. I mean, he did set aside a lot of money. I mean, the biggest single ticket item in next year's budget and the year after's budget for preparing for Brexit. Is that the right thing to do?
Well, if we were going to see the £350 million a week for the NHS, then we would be looking at £54 billion extra for the NHS over the next 3 years. And he's offered significantly less than that. We don't want Brexit to happen. We don't agree that it should happen. We think it's going to be an economic disaster. And therefore, it's pretty hard that the government are spending so much money on having to mitigate the impacts of something that we don't agree with anyway.
And again, some of the big ticket items, the changes on house purchases don't apply in Scotland.
No, they don't. We've got our own stamp duty system, LBTT it's called. We've got our own business rates system. But actually what we've done in business rates, which is hugely positive, is we undertook a whole-scale review of business rates. And then the Scottish Government agreed with the recommendations that were in that review, with the vast majority of them, to implement them as soon as possible. So we've done that in a much less piecemeal way than the government here has.
I mean, I noticed some people claiming, some SNP supporters, on social media saying that this was a budget for England rather than a budget for Scotland or for the whole country. Do you accept that?
Certainly an awful lot of England-centric announcements made today. So the housing stuff that's been announced, for example, is very England-centred. And actually part of that's because this is more of a problem in England than it is in Scotland. I mean, obviously we need more houses as well, and we're committed to doing that. But this is a problem that the Tory Chancellor has thought is something that needs sorted in England.
Now, he didn't go for unit pricing for alcohol as the Scottish Government has. What he did do was keep the duty flat except for low-cost, high-strength products. You think that was the right thing to do?
I think that's getting towards being the right thing to do. So he specifically mentioned the issues around high-strength ciders. And I think there are major issues around high-strength ciders, and that's actually what we've identified in Scotland and why we've gone for minimum unit pricing. So again, it's a piecemeal approach from the Chancellor. He could have done a whole-scale review. He could have brought in something that related to alcohol strength across the board, but he hasn't chosen to do that.
I mean, the problem, as with the unit price, is that it is the poorest on whom that has the biggest impact.
And that is absolutely the case, but this is a public health measure. This is a measure to improve the health of the population, just like the smoking ban was. You know, it's one of those things that will try to make people healthier across the country. And, you know, high-strength cider is not good for anyone, no matter what your income is.
A lot of jokes in there, including jokes about I'm a celebrity, get me out of here, or I'm a member of the Labour Party, get me out of here. Kezia Dugdale, former leader of Labour, has gone into the jungle. Now, the new leader of the Scottish Labour Party appears to think that possibly she ought to be punished for that, but Nicola Sturgeon's supporting her.
Yeah, well, you know what? I wouldn't have chosen to go into the jungle. I certainly wouldn't have chosen to go into the jungle during the time that Parliament was sitting. I think that was a real error of judgment by Kezia. But, you know, she's got a platform. Hopefully she uses it for good and not for, you know, just eating cockroaches.
Do you think she might be joining your party, as some people are suggesting?
It would be lovely if she was to join our party. She's a talented politician. Her speech against the rape clause was phenomenal. And, you know, we have a lot of shared values. If she wants to come and join us, she's welcome.
Councillor Bradman, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Well, with me now, the Shadow Chancellor Labour's John McDonnell. Welcome to you. Since the ideas about forgiving stamp duty were in your manifesto, presumably you welcome those?
We do, but we were doing it on the basis of quite a massive house building programme at the same time. If you don't build the homes, it just means prices will go up, and there's no real commitment to house building here. There's some promises for the long-term future, but nothing real at the moment.
Because, I mean, when Gordon Brown tried it, that's exactly what they say, that it just led to house prices going up.
Well, the OBR have said that in their report today, almost one for one, the prices will go up if you don't build the homes. And unfortunately, there's nothing in the budget as such that will give us the scale of building we need.
So will you oppose this then? When
We'll most probably try and amend it so that we can bring the house building programme forward that we also had in our manifesto.
What about the borrowing targets to cut borrowing year on year? If Labour comes to power, will you honour those?
Well, our fiscal rule is that we don't borrow for day-to-day spending, and over a 5-year rolling programme we eliminate the deficit. Now, the issue he's got here now is the productivity problem. If you don't invest in the economy, you will have that productivity problem. That's what we've got after 7 years of not investing.
But I mean, with nationalisation and eliminating PFI, presumably borrowing would have to go up to cover that.
No, it wouldn't, because we'd swap shares for bonds. But on the issue I'm making is that we've always said is in our fiscal rule, you will borrow to invest, but that investment grows the economy, and with the multiplier effect, it means you can afford the public services
so
you need.
So you think he should have borrowed more?
No, I think he should have adopted our proposal, which is actually borrow to invest, but not borrow for day-to-day spending. The problem that he's got £76 billion of tax giveaways to corporations and the rich. That means he's denying himself the resources that we really need for health, education and children.
But on balance, he has stimulated the economy. I mean, he's given back, over 5 years, he's giving away more than he's taking back in tax.
Yeah, but the reality is that, you know, he's not, as far as I can see, he doesn't seem to be living in the real world for the rest of us. He's done very little on health. Simon Stevens said if we didn't get 4 billion next year, it will be 5 million on the waiting list. At best, 450 million this year, 1.9 next year, nowhere near enough. Education, virtually nothing. You know, 5,000 head teachers wrote about cuts.
To cover those costs is not borrowing for investment. That would just have to be
but
borrowing. You have to be running up a debt.
No, you don't. You stop the tax giveaways to the corporations and the rich. 76 billion going to be given away in the next few years. You'd use that for the public services.
But you've got to have the economy succeeding, though, haven't you?
Of course you have, and that's why you need to invest. Borrow to invest, because that pays for itself, but don't borrow for day-to-day expenditure.
I mean, but history shows that it's better to have business investing than the state, doesn't it?
What you need to do is have businesses matching the state investment. And if you look at what's happening elsewhere, both in right the way across Europe, even in the States now, you'll see it's state investment that's stimulating the private investment.
I mean, you obviously are proposing a major changes in the way the economy works. Are you surprised that in this first budget of what could be a 5-year term, it's actually relatively small, the philosophical changes in the way the economy
I don't think he thinks he's going to be there for that long. I really don't. I think that the whole situation is unstable, and this was a budget really which did nothing. And the bar for this judging this budget from his own backbenchers and his cabinet was don't mess up. That was the only criteria.
Has he passed that? He's passed that.
I don't think he has, because
Where's
on the
he
housing, what's happened is he'll do the stamp duty thing, which will support. But if you don't build at the same time, prices will go up. And there's other elements in the housing thing proposals which are just re-announcements again.
What we are seeing is the cost of Brexit, that $3 billion being put aside for that. Do you regret now that you and Jeremy Corbyn weren't more enthusiastic resisting a vote to leave the European Union, bearing in mind that it's costing the taxpayer?
I think you're listening to the media too much.
I'm on the media.
I know, that's what you're listening to too much, because we did campaign hard, we toured all around the country.
Yeah, I mean, to be clear, you think it's a mistake that the country
Yes, we campaigned for Remain. We campaigned for Remain and reform, and I think that was the best message that we could get across. We lost the referendum, we have to respect it, but we worked hard in that campaign, and a lot of the media are trying to find an excuse why the referendum went wrong, and they're trying to scapegoat people.
I covered a lot of that campaign, but I mean, but you would say to your supporters, quite openly, you think it's best, it would have been better if we'd stayed in.
Of course, we've said that all the way along, but now the decision's made, we have to respect it.
And what do you think the impact's going to be? I mean, do you think $3 billion is going to cover the cost of what happens when we leave the European Union?
The way things are going at the moment in terms of the negotiations, anything could happen. And our problem is if we don't get it, well, there's some on Tory benches who are quite happy with no deal. If there is a no deal, that will affect the economy and jobs overall. What we're saying is you need to start negotiating seriously. Do it through mutual respect and mutual interest, and we'll get a good deal.
And just finally, do you think this was Philip Hammond's last budget?
I can't predict anything that's happening to Philip Hammond. All I can say is that this seemed a budget of doing absolutely nothing. It doesn't seem like a government in power, maybe in office or a chancellor in office, but certainly not in power.
John McDonald, thank you. Well, welcome back. And here, looking at the fallout from the budget, are Paddy Ashdown, Lord Ashdown, of course, the former leader of the Liberal Democrats, also Samuel Wilson from the DUP. Welcome to you both. Lord Ashdown, you've seen a lot of budgets in your time. How do you rate this one?
I think RIP any claim the Conservative Party can have again to economic competence. And we're in this mess directly as a result of their economic policies and the folly over Brexit. Both of these are now costing the country very, very dear. He had very little room for manoeuvre, thanks to his own economic incompetence and Brexit. I think the people who are going to suffer now are those people who are at the lower end, probably many of them who voted for Brexit as a result of the price of Brexit, and you see how that's gone up to 3.7 billion, the cost of that, and probably the NHS. So I think a desperate budget from a dying government.
I mean, your party, of course, backed Brexit. It's costing your taxpayers money. It's also leading to big problems with the border. Was that a bit of a mistake, do you think?
Well, I think that, first of all, this is the first budget where we have actually had direct input, because we've had negotiations and discussions with the government. And, you know, I think that, first of all, Brexit has not been costing the country as people predicted it would.
It's 3 billion, we're told today, an extra 3 billion.
The 3 billion is to prepare us for the infrastructure which is required for Brexit. But don't forget, that's less than 10 months of the payments that were the net payments that we're making to Europe anyhow. So it's a good investment. It's a good investment for the future, because of course once we are free of the chains of the EU, we have got much more scope for expanding the economy, expanding international trade, divesting ourselves of a lot of the regulation which kills businesses in the United Kingdom. So it's an investment for the future, just as investment in the infrastructure is an investment for the future. And I think that the government was wise to make that decision.
Lower wages and less protection for workers?
Well, no, it doesn't mean lower wages. Indeed, if you look at what the government did today, the increase in the national living wage, the increase in the national minimum wage, the increase in thresholds for those who are at the lower end of the income level, lifting more people out of taxation. I mean, 4 million people now, or 14 million people, are not going to be paying any tax at all. So, I mean, the government has actually addressed and been cognizant of those kinds of issues in the budget.
Yeah, that's good news.
Europe is now improving, increasing its economic competence, its economic growth, and we are stagnating at best and dying at worst. The chains of Europe, I think Mr. Wilson referred to. Well, think about this. This is a government now held hostage to its own previous economic incompetence, to the disastrous decision to hold a referendum on Brexit, and to the DUP. I really cannot imagine a worse people to be hostage to. It's a desperate government, and this is a dying government.
What have you contributed to this budget? As you say, you've got the government by the short and curlies.
Well, I think that if you look at some of the, obviously for Northern Ireland, we have had a lot of successes there in terms of the air passenger duty, VAT, review of VAT for hospitality industry, city deals, LIBOR funding, and some of the Barnett consequentials. But on a national level, and don't forget, with the government, we did raise the issue of the need to build houses, of the need to address some of the issues which are affecting young people in our economy, of the need to address the universal credit issue, a £1.5 billion going into universal credit as a result of this budget, and a whole range of other national issues. And don't forget, in all of the kinds of issues that we have raised with the government, we have been cognizant of the national problems as well as the kind of local issues that we had.
Let's talk about that houses issue. Do you think enough was done to sort out the housing problem?
No, I mean, this is a government of a policy of small measures in terms of housing. I don't say they're irrelevant completely, but they're not going to tackle the need to build substantially more houses in Britain. You needed something much bigger than that, and he doesn't have the room to produce that. Look, here's the bottom line. Britain is now getting poorer as a result of the Conservatives' economic policies and the Brexit decision. It's now going to become painfully poorer. And I think those who are going to suffer most from this government are those who depend on the NHS, no decent investment in that. Those whose jobs are now going to be seen to be at threat because of the economic situation, and those who depend in the long term on the growth in the British economy, which is being held back by stagnant productivity. It's a government that probably does the best it can in the circumstances, but those circumstances created by this government are just about as bad as they can get.
And it's very easy for Lord Ashdown to make those criticisms, but when his party was actually sharing government with the Conservative Party, none of those issues. I mean, house building was lower than what the government was predicting. Young people were being hit with university fees and a whole range of other things which he's now condemning the government for. His party actually shared in some of those things, and now they've got
but it has to be said, growth levels were higher, closer to the economic crunch than they are now. I mean, we've just had the worst predictions for economic growth for the next 5 years.
That's right.
And of course, growth levels were starting, and you were measuring against a lower base than what you're doing now, because we've had that period of growth, so you're measuring against a lower base.
No,
that's the first thing. And secondly, of course, there have been other international factors which have influenced that as well. And we also have, and this is on the unfortunate thing, we also have Lord Ashdown's party doing its darndest to talk the economy down to make sure that we don't have any growth.
You think that these
confidence.
documents are wrong when they say that the British economy is heading into a squeeze over the next 5 years?
No, I'm saying that the documents reflect the situation that we're in, but it also becomes those who lament the low economic growth not to spend every day in the chamber across the way there doing their best to undermine confidence in the economy, undermine investment, undermine consumer spending, because all they ever talk about is a gloom and doom, despite the fact that they got their predictions wrong for the last 2 years.
I'm sorry, but you really have to live with the facts. And the facts are this country is 40% dependent on foreign direct investment, probably more than any other advanced economy. That has now been cut by a third. We're now going to have the lowest growth rate for in my political memory. Meanwhile, Europe is growing fast. There's an implication of that,
I'm afraid. Thank you both very much for your time. Well, let's get the view of some of the experts who'll be combing through the meaning of this budget. With me are Nicky Morgan, who is the chair of the Treasury Select Committee, of course, former Conservative Cabinet Minister, also the director of the Institute for Fiscal Studies, Paul Johnson, and Carolyn Fairbairn, Director General of the CBI, the Confederation of British Industry. Welcome to you all. I just want to cut to the chase, if you like. What does this tell us about the economic prospects of the country over the next 5 years?
Well, if the OBR's right, then they're not very good. It looks like, on their basis, we're looking at growth of about 1.5% a year into the foreseeable future.
Do you think they are
and that's much worse than we've had over the last 60 or 70 years. Well, if you look what's happened to productivity over the last several years, it's been pretty poor. Lots of uncertainty around Brexit. Business investment is looking pretty weak at the moment. So there's all sorts of reasons for thinking that growth might, for some considerable period, be below where it was at least in the period up to 2008.
Are you as gloomy as that? We were told to be optimistic about the future.
It's a pretty sombre backdrop, and we know we have got a huge productivity problem, which is why I think looking at today and where the money is going, hitting some of those very important levers for growth in the future really matters. Innovation, skills, infrastructure, really important investments for today. I think they were pretty well hit. I mean, within the constraints of what there was available. So, the really big emphasis on regional growth, although need to make sure that some regions don't get left behind just because they don't have a mayor. The fact that there's going to be £2.3 billion more on innovation spend by 2021, these are the right areas to be investing.
But in spite of that, Nicky Morgan, we've still got this gloomy outlook.
Yes, and look, I think it is going to be difficult. I mean, it is growing, the economy, but it's going to be obviously very slow. Brexit is, as I said in my remarks in the Commons, it's a big cloud hanging over everything. And I think what the Chancellor did today and needed to do was to say, we're not just going to talk about Brexit, we're going to talk about the other things that people care about. Housing is a really big one, but so is the NHS. I think things like the National Retraining Service are a really good idea as well. And actually this thing about we're going to be at the forefront of technology and the industrial strategy, which is to come in the next couple of days, is also very important.
I mean, when you say Brexit is a big cloud, what do you mean?
Well, two things really. Firstly, obviously, it is a drag on the economy. It is undoubtedly affecting investment decisions, employment decisions. That's what we're hearing in evidence to the Select Committee.
Record orders at the moment. Order books are
full
of record levels.
If you're an exporter, then actually it's not been so bad, the sterling depreciation. But of course, if you are relying on food imports, and that's then feeding through into inflation, that's then affecting consumer demand. But the other thing actually is just the sort of fog it's having over Whitehall and Westminster. It's been lovely today actually not discussing the EU withdrawal bill for several hours, and I think the impact it's having on new thinking in Whitehall.
I mean, Paul Johnson, can we now say, look, this is what Brexit is costing?
No, of course we can't, because we don't know what Brexit's going to look like. So the OBR said a year ago that it thought the economy would be about 2% smaller in 2020 as a result of Brexit than it otherwise would have been. This year they haven't added anything to that, and they've essentially said we still don't really know what
But
Brexit
the Chancellor's put
means.
aside this £3 billion.
So there's all sorts of different costs to Brexit. I mean, there's the £40+ billion divorce bill. There's the cost in terms of what it might mean for the economy. What the OBR hasn't given us any more clues today about what they think about that. They gave us some clues a year ago, but they have layered on top of their reduced estimates of economic growth a year ago some more reduced estimates from bad productivity growth.
And upsides? Can you see any upsides?
Well, I just want to pick up though on the Brexit uncertainty, because the budget can't solve that, and what we are seeing is investment plans being put on hold, and we think there will be 60% of our firms will have implemented contingency plans by next March. So sitting alongside this budget, we have to have certainty, more certainty and clarity around Brexit.
Well, the £3 billion presumably would help then, because that means the government is taking some of the contingency measures to deal with Brexit.
I think it will really reassure businesses that that's happening, actually, because they are putting the plans in, and government will be putting those plans in as well. We'd like to see where it's going to be spent. Customs and regulators, we think, should be two of the main areas, but I think that will help. In terms of upsides, I think one of the things that has come over strongly today is that vision for a knowledge-led, innovation-led economy, which I think can be absolutely brilliant at, but we need to have the investments going in. And actually, the key thing for next year will be action. It needs to be delivered.
And are your members who are builders, are they going to be building more houses as a result of this budget?
I think builders will be building more houses if some of those actions that the Chancellor talked about in terms of planning, we have had big numbers before.
Did he? What we saw were financial measures.
Well, that's right. So he did talk about looking at planning changes, and those really need to happen because we've seen big numbers around housing before and they haven't happened. So this will be about changes coming through.
I mean, Nicky Morgan's suggestion is basically Conservative MPs wouldn't have, they were all NIMBYs. They wouldn't free up planning in their backyard.
No, I mean, actually what the Prime Minister was saying the other day, which I would agree with from my perspective as Midlands MP, is the planning permissions have been granted by the local authorities. What we're not seeing now is the delivery. Now, why is that? Is that lack of construction skills? Is it lack of money to get the projects off the ground?
Wanted to go further and she stopped it, didn't she?
Well, I think, no, there's an issue about Greenbelt, but actually there's only so much Greenbelt in the country. There's plenty of other areas and land that can be developed. The question is why not? So they've sent for Oliver Letwin, who you always send for when you want to know the answer to a difficult problem. So he's going to be doing a review for the government into that.
That went well in the Cameron government.
Well, I think, I haven't worked in the cabinet with Oliver, he's very good at coming up and really needling away till he gets the issues.
I mean, do you think it is going to stimulate the housing market to the extent of 300,000 houses a year, what we've heard so far?
I honestly don't know. I mean, we've had lots of promises in the past about additional house building. There is a bunch of stuff here. There's a combination of more public spending, more guarantees to increase private spending, what might be some planning reform. So it's the right set of ingredients and also some money for skills and so on in the construction sector.
Stamp duty cuts, do those help create more homes?
Almost certainly won't help create any more homes. It will give first-time buyers a little bit more power in the housing market relative to those who are in the second and third moving up the housing market. It will have some small impact probably on house prices as well.
I mean, Labour, I just was speaking to John McDonnell and he was saying, look, this won't work unless you're going to stimulate house building at the same time. And indeed, the Office of Budget Responsibility simply say it's going to mean people selling houses have more money, and not that people buying them will be able to buy them more easily.
Well, look, we on the committee will ask the OBR about that when they come before us next week. What I would say, though, for first-time buyers, actually, finding an extra slug of cash in order to pay stamp duty on top of saving for the deposit is undoubtedly a hurdle to them getting on the housing ladder. So, actually, and of course, we know that house price growth is slow.
If the house costs more, it doesn't make any difference.
But if house price growth is slowing across the country, that's what we need to understand exactly what the OBR, how they've calculated that. The reason they're independent, that's what they're there to do, is to point out the downsides as well as the upsides of what's being proposed. But I would say on the John McDonnell point, actually there is plenty of other stuff. As Paul has said, it's a comprehensive package. Planning reform, money for construction skills, money to get small builders building, to make sure that environmental issues around land can be tackled. So it's all those things happening. Some will obviously take longer to happen than others.
Now, if we take the big picture, which is that this is a net giveaway over the next 5 years, not dramatic, but it's still a giveaway. Given where we are in the economy, given where we are in the political cycle, Paul Johnson, is that the right thing for a Chancellor to do?
I don't think the Chancellor had any choice about other than to have some sort of giveaway. This is not getting out of austerity, I have to say. Most areas of public spending were not mentioned in the budget, and most areas of public spending are still seeing cuts over the next few years. So the giveaways were on a combination of health and some investment in R&D and infrastructure. It's actually what the Chancellor's done each time now. This is his third fiscal event. A year ago he gave some for prisons and infrastructure. Back in March he gave some for social care. This time it's health and housing. He picks them off a bit at a time, but overall it's still a very, very tight few years on the spending side.
You know, I had the Mayor of London standing there, and he said, I'm going to have to cut the number of police in London. I mean, that's shocking, isn't it?
I mean, the answer has, over time, to grow our way out of this. It really does. So the fact is, it's still within the fiscal rules. So by the mid-2020s, the Chancellor's still within the fiscal rules, and he's investing, I think, in some of the big areas. The fact is that there has to be something done for people here and now, and there was a fair bit around that, which we very much welcome.
I mean, police numbers cut, according to the Mayor. Nothing about defence spending, and a 40% cut in the Foreign Office budget. I mean, some people would say that we're just not looking after the first priority of any government, which is to look after national security.
Well, I mean, Gavin Williamson has already said he's going to go back and look again at the proposed changes to armed forces. All I'd say to the Mayor of London, I think if the Home Secretary was standing here, should be saying to Sadiq Khan he's got other choices that he could be making before he has to do that. But it is going to be tight. I mean, undoubtedly, and we've got to keep public spending under control. We can't go mad again. The Chancellor has pushed out when the budget is going to be balanced, but the deficit has been cut by 2/3. We can't continue. We couldn't, as a country, to spend more than we were bringing in terms of taxes, or to borrow more. That can't be the long-term sustainable answer, but it's right that there has been a bit of fiscal loosening in order, as Carolyn says, to invest in things that people need to see happening here and now, the NHS being one of them.
Well, of course, the NHS managers not satisfied with what they've heard today and saying they're on the edge of another crisis.
Well, they get £350 million for immediate winter pressures. There's £2.8 billion overall, £10 billion for capital. This government's already said about £10 billion, I think, over the course of this Parliament. So, it's a partnership between government and the NHS in making all this work. It's not going to be easy, but the Chancellor's shown he will respond when people ask for more.
OK, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you all very much indeed.